It's ready to go at this point.
Okay.
Dallas, Texas, what's up?
It's considered a ultra rare cancer. It's an extremely rare form of melanoma, which makes up 1% of all melanoma, forms in mucous membranes, has no known cause, has nothing to do with the sun, and the average age to get this diagnosis is 70 years old. I was diagnosed stage 3C, and once you go to stage 4, you're looking at single digits to make it like 5 years, okay? I'm so grateful that my oncologist that I met when I first got diagnosed said I should see a specialist, and so that's exactly what it did. I traveled all around Texas looking for a mucosal melanoma specialist, and I found one, and I went back and forth from here to Houston probably about 19 times. Did every treatment that possibly existed, multiple surgeries, radiation, immunotherapies, chemotherapies, you name it, I did it. And within that time frame, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half, those side effects almost took me out. And it was heavy. It was heavy on my family, heavy on everybody. Finally, it got to a point after I exhausted all of my options where I was told, hey, you know, you're out of options, but have you heard of this thing called TIL therapy? And I said, no, tell me about it. And he said, well, what we do is we take a tumor out, you know, and be like a lymph node or anything, send it off into a lab where they take the exact cells that mutated and then grow them into the billions. And then once those are ready after about 3 weeks, you enter the hospital, you do about a week of lymphodepletion, chemotherapy, bring your body back down to a blank slate, so you have no immune system. They give you back your cells, which is essentially just like a brand new army of white cells, and those cells go throughout your body like Pac-Man and eats all the dots and cherries until it's gone. Nothing altered, okay? But it is a one-time treatment. You do have to spend a couple of weeks in a hospital, but it's a one-time treatment. And as he told me this, I went to Colorado because that was the closest place to do it. There was 57 global locations for this clinical trial. It was a late stage, and they started doing research out of this from, I don't know, the late 70s, early 80s out of the NCI, and it's been in clinical trial stages for 4+ decades. And I go out to Colorado in November of 2019, sign my consent, go back, do my surgery. I'm starting to very clinically decline, and while I'm waiting to have my cells grown, I end up doing baseline scans, and it turns out that after all this time, I now have a brain tumor. I had metastasized prior to that to my lungs, my liver, my kidneys, neoplasms, all these spots on your body you don't even know that you had. It was ridiculous, the amount of cancer I had so many lung tumors at one point. They just said innumerable amounts, too many to count. Can you believe that? And so I was like, well, you're the doc. And once I caught this brain tumor and that kicked me out of the trial, they said, look, you know, we're sorry, but since it's a late stage trial, they have a very final infusion date, and that's January 15th of 2020. And they told me this on December 10th. There's this very strict timeline was what they call a washout period in between the time that you get your infusion and from your last like and final treatment. So they said I would have to end up getting radiation to my brain and then rescan to prove that it was stable or in reduction to get back in. And the very final day to do this was December 25th. Well, scanning places closed on the 25th, so the 24th would be my last option. And they're telling me this on December 10th. So I ended up going to the radiologist. He said we'd have to do 5 sessions of radiation and then scan. So I had to fight insurance for 6 days. Finally got the approval. Day afterwards, got the mask made. I did 5 sessions of radiation in 4 days because that's all I had. And the 4th day, they gave me a double dose. Very next day, I scanned on Christmas Eve, 2019. Filled out my will. Waited till the 2nd of January, flew out to Colorado, saw my oncologist on January 3rd, and she said that my 1 centimeter tumor on my occipital lobe went from 1 centimeter to 1.2, and my heart dropped. But turns out it's what they call pseudoprogression, which means that it was inflammation. So they were able to prove that it did work, and they were going to let me back in, but I had to wait till the 8th to get back in. So I'm like, okay, at least I got a chance. You know, if anybody's seen Dumb and Dumber, where he's like, so you're saying there's a chance? So that's all I wanted, because it was either that or go to hospice, and I was definitely not going to hospice. If I was going out, I was going out swinging. So I got into the hospital on January 8th, did my week of lymphodepletion. Then it came in on the 15th for my cells, and there was a bunch of extra people in there, and I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, Chris, you're the very last person in this clinical trial to be dosed. We're going to make a press release. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I've never had anything like that. Of course, they don't mention my name, but I was like, all right, and then I forget about it. I follow it up with 6 more doses of this activating treatment called IL-2. Basically spent 13 days in the hospital, 12 nights, get released, and this is in January of 2020. My first follow-up 6 weeks later, at the end of February of 2020, I had a 50 to 60% reduction. And then within 8 or 9 months, I had what they call a CMR, complete metabolic response. So, thank you very much. I went from almost being in hospice and writing out my will to having 0 traces of cancer. And that all happened from a one-time treatment that had been in clinical trial stages forever and ever. Well, in February of 2024, it got its FDA approval. It's the first ever autologous advanced cell therapy for any solid tumor cancer as a second line of treatment. There's a confirmatory trial going on right now as a first line, but you know that 90% of all cancer are solid tumors. Cancers that, you know, colon cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, metastatic melanoma. You know, the other 10%, usually hematologic cancers, you know, they have CAR-T, which is an advanced cell therapy, but the same thing, it's a second line of treatment, but when it works, it works. And all of this work comes out of clinical trials. It comes from funding, and that's got to start somewhere. And that's why we're all here, because saying earlier, 40% of the population within their lifetime will probably get diagnosed with cancer is the chance. And if it's not you, maybe it might be someone you know. And so it hits real heavy. It hits very heavy. I wake up every day and I'm like, I can't believe that the story that I'm talking about is actually me. You know, I used to have dark brown hair, you know, it was real tan. I was actually on swim team when I lived in California in 1991. Amanda Beard was on my swim team. Olympic swimmer, anybody heard of her? Just a long time ago. So, but I was willing to do anything I had to do, and it was a clinical trial, and it came from multiple clinical trials, passing on that research, like I said, 4 decades before it finally got approved. And there's continuing clinical trials that are currently going on for lung cancer, cervical cancer, that'll be up for FDA approval. And so what's going on with raising funds in these activities and Swim Across America, it's huge. I can't even begin to explain how much that means. It's huge. So, like I said, I travel all over the country trying to tell my story, but it just really hits home, and it hits heavy for me to be able to do this in my backyard and come out here this morning, and I just feel so blessed. And I want to thank Swim Across America so much for asking me to come out and share my story. And thank you everybody for what you're doing. From the bottom of my heart, God bless. Thank you.